She was mocked the moment she stepped into the gun store. "Hey lady, the coffee shop's across the street." A clerk sneered at the woman in a faded windbreaker and worn-out shoes. Another customer added, "Canvas bag, clueless face must think this is a vintage boutique." Rachel didn't respond. She just tapped the glass counter lightly. "Show me the M-Raid Ghost Edition." The unreleased version. No one could say a word after that because that rifle had never been sold outside the Ghost Viper unit. The gun shop was a hive of noise and ego, the kind of place where testosterone hung thicker than the smell of gun oil. A live shooting demo was in full swing out back, and the crowd, mostly men, a few women trying to outdo them, threw around boasts like they were tossing darts. Rachel stepped through the door, her dark brown hair loose and brushing the shoulders of her faded green windbreaker. Her jeans were wrinkled, her sneakers peeling at the toes, and her gray canvas backpack looked like it had seen better days. She didn't belong, or so they thought. The clerk, Chad, a wiry guy with a goatee and a smirk that screamed he'd seen it all, leaned over the counter. "You lost, sweetheart. Yoga class is next door. This place sells heavy metal." A guy in a backwards baseball cap, his arms crossed like he owned the place, let out a sharp whistle. Canvas bag, worn shoes thought that this was a thrift store. The crowd snickered heads, turning to get a better look at her. A woman in a tight ponytail waving a fake pistol like it was a designer purse shook her head with a pitying smile. "You've wandered into a man's arena, sweetheart." Rachel didn't flinch. Her brown eyes scanned the room slow and steady, then locked onto the sniper rifle section. She walked toward it, her steps quiet but sure, like she was crossing a tightrope no one else could see. A burly guy with a leather vest, his arms tattooed with skulls and flames, stepped in front of Rachel as she reached the rifle case. He planted himself like a wall, his voice loud enough to carry over the demo's gunfire. "Hey, Missy, you're blocking the view for the real customers." He gestured at her backpack, his lip curling. "What's in there? Your knitting supplies." The crowd roared, some clapping like it was a performance. Rachel paused, her hand still on the strap, and looked up at him. Her face didn't change, but her eyes held his for a moment longer than he expected. She stepped around him, not a word, her sneakers brushing the floor so softly it was like she wasn't there. The guy's laugh faltered, his buddies nudging him to keep going, but he just shrugged, muttering, "Whatever, she's nobody." Rachel's fingers grazed the glass case, and the room's energy shifted like a storm cloud, moving in without a sound. The laughter followed her, sharp and cutting. Chad trailed behind his sneakers, squeaking on the polished floor. "What you think you're gonna buy a Barrett? 50. Those things cost more than your whole outfit." The backwards cap guy, now leaning against a display case filled with gleaming handguns, called out, "Bet she's just here for a selfie. Gotta get those Instagram likes, right?" The woman with the fake pistol laughed louder, tossing her head back like she was in on some private joke. Rachel didn't turn. She stood in front of the glass case, her fingers brushing the strap of her backpack. The rifles inside were all menace and precision, their barrels catching the harsh fluorescent light. She didn't lean in, didn't gawk like a tourist. She just stood there, her posture straight, but not stiff, like she'd been in rooms like this 100 times before. The crowd's chuckles started to thin, not because they respected her, but because her calm was starting to feel wrong. Like she wasn't playing by their rules. Before we keep going, let's pause for a second. If Rachel's quiet strength hits you, if you've ever felt that sting of being judged before you even open your mouth, do me a favor. Pull out your phone, hit that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to the channel. Stories like hers matter. They're for anyone who has been underestimated, overlooked, or laughed at. Let's keep telling them together. All right, back to the shop. A woman in a tailored blazer, her nails painted a glossy red, stepped forward from the crowd, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Oh, honey, you don't have to pretend here. We all know you're just browsing." She tilted her head, her smile sharp as a blade, and held up her phone, snapping a quick photo of Rachel's faded windbreaker. "This'll be cute for my story lost shopper at the gun shop." The crowd chuckled, phones coming out, flashes popping. Rachel's hand paused on her backpack strap, her fingers tightening just enough to show she'd noticed. She didn't turn, didn't snap back. Instead, she adjusted her stance, her shoulders squaring slightly, and kept her eyes on the rifles. The woman's smile wavered, her phone lowering as Rachel's silence stretched, making the air feel heavier. The crowd's laughter petered out, replaced by an uneasy rustle like they'd expected a reaction and didn't know what to do without one. Chad wasn't letting up. He tapped the counter with a pen, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "So, what do you want, lady?" "Something shiny to impress your friends." Rachel's eyes flicked to him, then back to the rifles. Her voice was soft, almost swallowed by the noise of the room. "Show me the custom M-Raid Ghost Edition. The unreleased version." The words hit like a dropped glass, shattering the room's rhythm. Chad's smirk froze mid-curl. The backwards cap guy choked on his energy drink, coughing into his fist. The woman with the fake pistol lowered it, her eyebrows shooting up like she'd been slapped. An older man in the corner, his jacket patched and his face carved with lines from years outdoors, took a step back. "What?" "That model's only known to Black Ops personnel." Chad stammered, his voice cracking just enough to show he was rattled. The old shooter spoke up, his voice gravelly and slow. "I saw one like that in the Eastern Zone, 8 years ago. Never forget it." Rachel didn't blink. She tapped the glass again, her fingers light but deliberate, like she was knocking on a door she knew would open. "So, yes or no?" The manager, a stocky guy with a buzz cut and a permanent scowl, stepped out from the back. He gave Chad a sharp look, then unlocked the vault behind the counter without a word. He pulled out a rifle, matte black sleek, with a scope that looked like it could cut through fog. No one in the room had ever seen it on display. No one had even heard of it outside classified circles. As the manager set the rifle on the counter, a wiry teenager with a buzzed head and a vape pen dangling from his lips pushed through the crowd. "Yo, no way she even knows what that is," he said, his voice loud and brash, egged on by the nods of his friends. He pointed at Rachel's sneakers, the soles nearly worn through. "Look at those kicks. Bet she can't even afford the cleaning kit for that thing." His friends howled, one slapping his back like he'd just won a debate. Rachel's hand stilled on the counter, her fingers brushing the edge of the rifle's case. She tilted her head slightly, just enough to catch the teenager's eye, and her lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Not warm, not cold, just there. The teenager's laughter caught in his throat, his vape pen hovering mid-air as her gaze held him. She didn't say a word, but the room felt smaller, the air tighter, like she had just taken up all the space he thought he owned. The crowd shifted some, craning their necks, others stepping back like they sensed trouble. Chad tried to laugh it off, but it came out forced, too loud for the quiet that had settled. "Okay, fine, you know the name of a fancy gun. But can you even hold that thing? It weighs over 10 kilograms. He crossed his arms, waiting for her to buckle under the weight. The backwards cap guy, now holding a rifle of his own, tossed it toward Rachel like it was a football. "Careful, might snap your wrist." She caught it one-handed, the motion so smooth it looked rehearsed. The rifle didn't wobble, didn't dip. She held it steady, her arm strong, but not tense like the weight was an afterthought. The room went quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear your own pulse. Chad's laugh died in his throat. The backwards cap guy opened his mouth, then shut it, his bravado crumbling. Rachel set the rifle on the counter, her movements precise, almost gentle. "Go ahead, disassemble it," Chad said, trying to sound tough again. "Bet you don't know how—" Rachel's fingers moved like they were following a script only she could read. 8 seconds later, the rifle was in pieces, pin screws barrel, all laid out in perfect order like a puzzle solved in a single breath. A man in a crisp polo shirt, his hair gelled to perfection, leaned over the counter, his voice smooth but laced with condescension. "Impressive trick," he said, clapping slowly, each clap sharp and deliberate. "But let's be real, you probably watched a YouTube tutorial last night, right?" He turned to the crowd, winking, and they laughed, relieved to have someone break the tension. Rachel didn't look at him. She slid a single screw back into place, her finger steady, and paused to adjust it with a flick of her wrist, the motion so precise it was almost surgical. The man's clapping slowed his smile, slipping as she continued reassembling the rifle without a glance in his direction. The crowd's laughter faded, replaced by a murmur of uncertainty, as if they were starting to wonder what else she could do with that kind of focus. Rachel's silence wasn't just a response, it was a wall, and they were all on the wrong side of it. The woman with the fake pistol whispered to the guy next to her, "Who even does that?" Her voice was sharp, but there was a tremor in it, like she was starting to doubt her own confidence. Rachel didn't look up. She started reassembling the rifle, her hands moving with the same calm precision. But then she paused, pulling a paperclip from her backpack. She pressed it lightly against the receiver, her eyes narrowing as she studied it. The crowd leaned in, confused, their murmurs rising. "This bolt is 0. 3 mm loose," she said, her voice soft but clear enough to cut through the noise. "In sub-zero conditions, it veers off target." The mercenary in the corner, a grizzled man with a scar running across his knuckles, muttered, "How the hell does she know that?" His voice was low, almost to himself, but it carried. Rachel glanced at him, her expression blank, but her eyes sharp. "Because I used it to hit a moving target from the top of Sun La Peak in level 7 wind." The words landed like a grenade, heavy and final. No one laughed. No one moved. The manager's jaw tightened, like he was starting to see something he wished he hadn't. A woman with a sleek bob and diamond earrings who'd been watching from the sidelines stepped forward, her voice cutting through the silence like a whip. "Okay, so you've got some skills," she said, her tone sharp and skeptical. "But let's not get carried away. This is a gun shop, not a circus." She gestured at Rachel's backpack, her lip curling. "What's next, pulling a rabbit out of that thing?" The crowd snickered some, nodding like she'd just scored a point. Rachel zipped her backpack, closed the sound sharp in the quiet room, and slung it over her shoulder. She didn't respond, but her fingers lingered on the zipper, tracing the worn fabric like it held a memory. For a split second, her eyes flicked to a small patch on the bag, a faded emblem barely visible, shaped like a viper's head. The woman's smirk faltered, her eyes catching the patch, but she shook it off, turning to the crowd for support. Rachel's silence wasn't loud, but it was heavy, like a weight settling over the room, making everyone feel smaller than they wanted to admit. The mercenary stepped closer, his boots heavy on the floor. "Sun La." That was, a decade ago. His voice was gruff, but there was something else in it, respect maybe, or fear. Rachel didn't answer. She finished reassembling the rifle, sliding each piece back into place with a soft click. The backwards cap guy tried to break the tension, chuckling nervously. "Okay, so you know some trivia. Doesn't mean you can shoot." The manager, sensing a chance to take back control, gestured toward the outdoor range. "Let's see it then. There's a coin out there, 150 meters. No one's hit it. Ever?" The crowd parted as Rachel picked up the rifle and walked outside her sneakers, scuffing the gravel. The range was a long stretch of dirt and targets the air sharp with the smell of gunpowder and dust. A single coin dangled from a string, glinting in the late afternoon sun. The backwards cap guy shouted, "If she hits it, I'll mop this place with my tongue." The crowd laughed, but it was thinner now, less sure, like they were starting to wonder if they'd misjudged her. As Rachel walked to the range, a man in a camouflage jacket, his face red from too much sun or too much whiskey, called out from the crowd. "Hey, little lady, don't trip over that rifle. It's bigger than you are." His buddies roared one, slapping his knee like it was the funniest thing he'd heard all day. Rachel didn't break stride. She shifted the rifle to her other hand, her movements fluid, like she was carrying a book instead of a weapon. The man's laughter trailed off as she reached the firing line, his buddies nudging him to keep going, but he just waved them off, his eyes narrowing. Rachel set her backpack down, the gravel crunching under it, and adjusted her grip on the rifle. The crowd's chatter faded, their eyes locked on her, waiting for her to fail. But there was something in the way she stood, feet planted, shoulders relaxed, that made the air feel tighter, like the moment before a lightning strike. Rachel stepped up to the firing line, the rifle resting lightly in her hands. She didn't adjust, the scope didn't take a practice swing. She aimed for 2 seconds too and fired. The shot cracked through the air sharp and clean, and the coin split in half, the pieces spinning as they fell to the ground. The crowd went silent, the kind of silence that feels like the world holding its breath. Chad's mouth hung open, his clipboard forgotten in his hand. The woman with the fake pistol dropped it onto the counter, her hands trembling. The mercenary stared at Rachel, his scarred knuckles white as he gripped his own rifle. Rachel didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just walked back to the counter and set the rifle down, placing it exactly where it had been before, every angle perfect, like she was leaving no trace of herself behind. A young woman in a bright pink hoodie, her phone already out to record, pushed forward her voice high and mocking. "Okay, that was cute, but let's see you do it again," she said, holding her phone up like a challenge. One shot doesn't mean anything, probably just luck. The crowd murmured some nodding, eager for Rachel to falter. Rachel didn't look at her. She reached into her backpack, pulling out a small worn cloth, and wiped her hands slowly, deliberately, like she was cleaning off the weight of their words. The cloth had a faint stain, dark and irregular, like blood that had never quite washed out. The young woman's phone dipped slightly, her confidence wavering as Rachel folded the cloth and tucked it away. The crowd's murmurs quieted their eyes, darting between Rachel and the rifle, as if they were starting to see her for the first time. The gunsmith, an older man with thick glasses and hands stained from years of oil and metal, had been quiet until now. He stepped forward, his eyes locked on Rachel's hands as she set the rifle down. "Someone tuned a rifle just like that," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "At the Ghost Viper outpost. Same grip, same care." He squinted at her hand, noticing a faint scar shaped like an arrow across her knuckles. The room went rigid. The mercenary's voice broke the silence, low and shaky. "She's ghost number 17. Rachel's eyes met his calm and steady, like she was looking through him. "I came here for peace," she said softly. "But if needed, I still shoot with precision from 400 meters. The words weren't a threat, just a fact, but they landed like a blade, sharp and cold. The backwards cap guy took a step back, his energy drink slipping from his hand and splashing on the floor. The woman with the fake pistol looked away, her face flushed, her confidence gone. As Rachel stood there, a man in a sleek black jacket, his watch glinting under the lights, leaned toward the manager, his voice low but loud enough for the crowd to hear. "You're really letting her touch that rifle? She doesn't even look like she can afford the ammo." He chuckled, adjusting his cufflinks, his tone suggesting he was used to being listened to. Rachel's hand paused mid-motion, her fingers hovering over the rifle's scope. She tilted her head slightly, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment, and she adjusted the scope's dial with a single precise twist. The click was soft, but it echoed in the silence like a door locking shut. The man's chuckle died, his cufflinks suddenly feeling too tight. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting to the manager, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Rachel's adjustment wasn't just a gesture, it was a statement, and everyone felt it. Chad, desperate to regain some kind of authority, stepped up with his clipboard, his voice louder than it needed to be. "Hold on. You can't just... Where's your ID? You can't test fire without registration." Rachel reached into her backpack and pulled out a worn, nearly blank card. No photo, no name, just a faded emblem and a string of numbers etched into the plastic. Chad snorted, holding it up for the crowd to see. "What's this, a library card?" The manager, his buzz cut gleaming under the lights, raised his voice. "No documents, no access to high-grade weapons." The crowd murmured, some nodding, others looking uneasy, like they weren't sure whose side they were on anymore. Rachel slipped the card back into her bag, her movements slow and deliberate, like she was giving them one last chance to rethink their words. She didn't argue, didn't explain. She just zipped her backpack and started walking toward the door, her sneakers quiet on the polished floor, her head high but not proud. A middle-aged man with a beer belly and a faded army cap stepped forward, his voice booming with false bravado. "Hey, don't walk away yet. You think you're some kind of hotshot? He jabbed a finger toward her backpack, his face red. Bet that thing's full of nothing but cheap makeup and dreams. The crowd laughed, but it was nervous now, like they were waiting for the other shoe to drop. Rachel stopped her hand on the door handle and turned just enough to look at him. Her eyes were calm, but there was a weight to them, like she could see every mistake he'd ever made. She let go of the handle, adjusted her backpack, and opened it just enough to pull out a small metal case no bigger than a cigarette pack. She set it on the counter, the click of metal on glass sharp in the silence. The man's face fell, his finger dropping as he stared at the case, its surface etched with a faint, unfamiliar symbol. The crowd's laughter stopped, replaced by a tense hush, as if they all knew something was coming, but didn't know what. The door swung open before she reached it. A man in a black suit and dark glasses stepped inside his presence, shifting the air in the room like a storm rolling in. He was tall, his face unreadable, his movements precise like he'd been trained to take up exactly the right amount of space. He scanned the crowd, his eyes hidden behind the glasses, then walked straight to Rachel. He leaned in and whispered, "Confirmation code 870. Your next mission begins tonight." Then he did something that made the room freeze. He lowered his head and placed his hand to his chest, a gesture so subtle most wouldn't know what it meant. But the gunsmith did. The mercenary did. It was the Ghost Viper salute, a sign reserved for legends who didn't exist on paper. Chad dropped his clipboard, the clatter echoing in the silence. The backwards cap guy's energy drink hit the floor, the can rolling under a display case. The woman with the fake pistol pressed herself against the counter, her eyes wide, her hands clutching her purse like it could protect her. Rachel turned to the crowd, her voice calm as ever. 60 minutes flew by, didn't they? As Rachel walked toward the door with the man in the black suit, a woman in a leather jacket, her hair dyed a bright red, called out, her voice sharp with desperation to save face. "What, you think you're some secret agent now? This isn't a movie." She laughed, but it was forced, her hands fidgeting with a keychain shaped like a bullet. Rachel paused her hand on the doorframe and glanced back, her eyes catching the woman's for just a moment. She reached into her pocket, pulled out a single bullet casing, and set it on the counter next to the metal case. The casing was old, its surface scratched but polished like it had been carried for years. The woman's laugh stopped her keychain slipping from her fingers and clattering to the floor. The crowd's eyes locked on the casing, its presence heavier than any shout, as if it held a story no one dared to ask about. The room stayed silent as she walked out, the man in the black suit following her like a shadow. The crowd didn't move, didn't speak. They just stood there staring at the door like it might explain what they'd just seen. Chad's hands shook as he picked up the clipboard, his smirk gone, his confidence shattered. The manager muttered something under his breath, his face pale like he was replaying every word he'd said to her. The gunsmith went back to his workbench, his head down, his hands moving slower than usual like he was afraid to make a sound. The mercenary slipped out quietly, his rifle still in his hands, his eyes fixed on the ground like he was trying to forget what he had just witnessed. The woman with the fake pistol grabbed her purse and left without a word, her heels clicking too fast on the floor like she couldn't get out of there fast enough. Outside, the gravel crunched under Rachel's sneakers as she walked to a black SUV parked at the edge of the lot. She didn't look back, didn't pause to savor the moment. She just opened the door and slid inside her backpack, resting on her lap like it was part of her. The man in the black suit got in beside her, and the car pulled away silent and smooth, disappearing into the dusk. Back in the shop, the consequences started to roll in, quiet but unstoppable, like a tide coming in. Chad got a call from the owner later that day. He was fired effective immediately for disrespecting a classified operative. The call was short, the owner's voice cold, and Chad didn't argue. He just packed his things and left his head down, his goatee no longer a badge of confidence. The backwards cap guy didn't fare much better. He'd recorded the whole thing on his phone, thinking it'd make him look cool online. He posted the video that night, captioning it with some snarky comment about thrift store girl. By morning it had gone viral, but not the way he'd hoped. People in the comments tore him apart, calling him out for his cruelty, his ignorance. His sponsor, a big-name gear brand, saw the backlash and dropped him by noon, their statement short and brutal, conduct unbecoming. His DMs filled with hate and his follower count tanked. He deleted the video, but it was too late. The internet doesn't forget. The woman with the fake pistol tried to laugh it off at her next socialite brunch, retelling the story like it was a funny anecdote. But her friends, usually quick to laugh, went quiet. They'd seen the video too shared across group chats and X posts. They didn't say much, but the invitation stopped coming. She wasn't welcome at the next event or the one after that. Her circle, built on status and appearances, didn't want to be associated with someone who'd mocked a legend. She spent the next week refreshing her feeds, hoping for a message, an apology, anything. Nothing came. The old shooter, the one who'd mentioned the Eastern Zone, sat at a bar that night, nursing a beer in a dim corner. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was to the bartender, his voice low and rough. "Saw a woman like her once," he said, staring into his glass. "Back when I was in the field, you don't forget someone who can make a shot like that." He didn't say her name, didn't need to. The bartender nodded, not understanding, but sensing the weight of the story. The old shooter finished his drink and left his patched jacket blending into the night. The gunsmith back at the shop spent the next week quietly recalibrating every M-raid in stock, checking for the 0. 3mm flaw, Rachel had pointed out. He found it in 3 rifles, just like she'd said. He didn't tell anyone, didn't make a fuss. He just fixed them, his hands steady, but his mind replaying her grip, her scar, the way she'd handled the rifle like it was an extension of herself. He'd worked in the shop for 20 years, seen every kind of shooter come through. But no one like her. He kept her card, the one Chad had mocked, tucked in a drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. The manager got a visit from a government liaison the next morning. No words were exchanged, just a nod and a file handed over. The liaison was gone before the manager could ask questions. He didn't open the file, didn't need to. He knew it was about her, about what he'd let happen in his shop. He spent the rest of the day in his office, the door closed, the phone off the hook. The shop felt different after that, quieter, like the air had been sucked out of it. Customers came and went, but the buzz was gone. They all knew something had shifted, even if they didn't know her name. A week later, a quiet rumor started circulating among the regulars. Someone had found an old military forum post, buried deep in an obscure corner of the internet, mentioning a sniper from Ghost Viper who'd taken out a target from 400 meters in a storm. The post didn't have a name, just a code name, Arrow. No one could confirm it, but the description matched the scar, the grip, the way she moved, like she was part of the weapon. The regulars whispered about it over beers, their voices low, like they were afraid she'd hear them from wherever she was. The shop's atmosphere never recovered the bravado, replaced by a quiet unease, as if Rachel's presence had left a mark that wouldn't fade. Rachel didn't go back to the shop, didn't post about it online, didn't tell anyone what had happened. She just kept moving her faded windbreaker and peeling sneakers, blending into the next city, the next mission. Her life was a series of quiet entrances and quieter exits, each one leaving a mark no one could erase. She didn't need validation, didn't need apologies. She carried her truth in the way she walked, the way she held a rifle, the way she looked at a room and made it go still. The scar on her hand, the arrow that had given her away, was just one of many, each a story she'd never tell. For everyone who's ever been judged, who's felt the weight of a room turning against them, Rachel's story isn't just hers. It's yours. You've stood in those shoes, felt those eyes, heard those laughs. You've carried the sting of being underestimated, dismissed, or mocked. And like her, you kept going. You didn't break. You didn't need to shout to be heard. Your strength spoke for itself, quiet and unshakable. Where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.